Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge federal candidates answered questions at the Yates Theatre last night, trying to shore up support for their parties. Meanwhile, the federal party leaders took part in the English language debate last night, with climate change being a major focus. And a Canadian scientist won the Nobel Prize in Physics. The man from Manitoba shared the honor with two others.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Robbins.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. With the federal election in less than 2 weeks, many are still trying to learn everything they can about their local candidates. I had a chance to ask some of the Lethbridge candidates questions at an all-candidates forum last night. Questions about the issues that are having a big impact on many. Ainsley O'Reilly has the story.
About 200 people filled the Yates Theatre for an all-candidates forum. Bridge City News' very own Hal Roberts took part in a media panel that was able to ask questions to all of the candidates. Each party representative had a minute to answer. With a wide range of topics being fired at them, candidates tried to stick to their core principles.
When I'm doing that, when I'm at the doors, some of the things that I'm hearing have to do with overall affordability. It has to do with following the rule of law. It has to do with the integrity of the leader. It has to do with a grand vision for our country and propelling us forward on the world stage and drawing economic investment into our country in order to make sure that we stay strong.
And I come back to Lethbridge. I think about what is going to affect us here in Lethbridge. What is the impact that we need here felt from our federal government? We need so much funding for opioid crisis resolution.
So happy that we had a chance to talk about creating a real nation-to-nation relationship with the Indigenous peoples in our area. It's so important that we respect our treaties.
Online questions were submitted, and people were encouraged to ask questions in person. One man was really passionate about the NDP's proposed wealth tax for those who earn $20 million annually.
Well, what's to say that the next group that they decide they want to tax a second time happens to be a group I fall into? What happens if they decide they want to tax the handicapped a second time, so I have to pay on after-tax dollars again? What happens if they decide they want to tax me because what I did? What happens if they want to tax me again on my after-tax dollars because I'm single?
It was not touched on in the forum, but Stephanie Watson of the Green Party was asked afterwards about why her party wants to legalize sex work.
And it also allows us to be able to deal with the traffickers who traffic people for this thing. But there's also a lot of people who want to do sex work and be paid for it. And it actually, there's a large movement, especially within the disability community, where that physical connection with another person is so important to mental health.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Other talk around water coolers today was last night's English leaders debate. One of the interesting exchanges between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer was that Trudeau kept comparing Andrew Scheer to Ontario Premier Doug Ford. Scheer responded with, "There's an opening for the leadership of the Ontario Liberals. Perhaps you should apply." Overall, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says he was happy with last night's leaders' debate, which focused so much on climate change. PPC leader Maxime Bernier also discussed its importance.
We were pleased to contrast our approach and our approach on fighting climate change and our platform with all the leaders on stage. I think it's important for Canadians to be able to make a choice. And once again, I was very, very happy that so much of this debate throughout all the themes was actually on climate change and our approaches on fighting it. I just also need to highlight that Mr. Singh has been very clear on repeated occasions that part of the NDP's approach is to increase refinery capacity in Canada. He said it many times, and I think people need to understand that there are many different approaches on climate change, and of all the different approaches, there is only one plan that has been determined by a number of experts to be both ambitious and doable, and that is the plan that we've put in place over the past 4 years and are going to continue doing even more on.
It is too important for the future of this country. So I want to impose Canadians on climate change. I want to impose costly regulation on Canadians. And as you know, the environment is a shared jurisdiction. So provinces can have policy on climate change. But like I said in the debate, we must have concrete actions for the environment.
Activists with the Extinction Rebellion movement blocked traffic on bridges around the world yesterday, including a bridge in both Calgary and Edmonton. 18 people were also arrested following a protest in Halifax where roads were blocked. The protesters were demanding more urgent action against climate change.
Do you know what necessity is the thing that brought me here today? I'm just really fearful for the future of our planet, and I'm also hopeful. You know, human beings have risen together and have come together in the past to face tremendous challenges, and I think we can do that again. We do know that in the wake of the April Extinction Rebellion action in London, the UK, in the wake of that, the Conservative UK government declared a climate emergency. So there is some action, and of course declaring a climate emergency is simply the first step, but it has proven effective in the past in other places, so we'll see how we go.
Closer to home, the first 2 community peace officer vehicles have their new decals, outfitted with gear, and are ready to hit the streets this week. People in Lethbridge may find themselves taking a closer look.
We have 2 vehicles for the CPOs. One, as you can see here, is the Dodge truck, and then we will have a Subaru Forester coming to us shortly. I don't know exactly when, but it will be here. They are fully kitted out, and with these vehicles, our CPOs do have the same authorities under the Traffic Safety Act and many different provincial statutes. So drivers and those that they stop will have the same obligations to provide registration, insurance, the documents as requested by a community peace officer at that time. So I will be actually putting out a schedule for all our CPOs so we're not fighting like little kids to get the vehicle. So.
Community peace officers are sworn officers with limited authority to enforce parts of the criminal code and city bylaws. That includes the Traffic Safety Act. Well, we had another snowfall warning earlier today. Many areas of southwestern Alberta had to deal with lots of the white stuff. Before hitting the road, we've been told time and time again to winterize our vehicles. Staff Sergeant Glenn Henry of the Coaldale RCMP says that means putting on winter tires in time for extreme weather conditions. Sometimes we're not able to escape the conditions and end up in the ditch. The RCMP has a list of suggested items to keep in your vehicle in case this happens to you.
Carry good winter clothing with them. Make sure they have boots, make sure they have proper jackets, that type of stuff. But also you can prepare your vehicle with things like candles, emergency food, rations, some type of signal light, flashlight, anything that will get you through the night. If you have a cell phone, means of recharging a cell phone, if you have spare batteries for your flashlight, those type of things. Transport Canada also has a winter tip for us, and that is to avoid using cruise control during slippery weather conditions. Chinook Regional Hospital began offering midwifery services as of Monday of this week. Those services will include prenatal care and birthing support with the addition of 5 midwives to the hospital staff.
Midwives have admitting privileges at Chinook Regional Hospital. We've been working really collaboratively with the team here for almost the last year to try to get midwives into the facility, and we're really excited. It's been a really great collaboration. Midwives can do home births or hospital births. We do basically 50-50 of our births in home or in hospital, and so now we're excited that women can have a choice here in Lethbridge to either have a baby in the home or in the hospital.
The changes were in response to a 50% increase across the province in the number of families using midwives during pregnancies and births. A Canadian-born scientist is one of 3 who has won this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. James Peebles, who is originally from St. Boniface, Manitoba, will share the $1.2 million prize with Michael Mayer and Didier Queloz. They won the Nobel for the discovery of an exoplanet orbiting a solar type of star. The laureates will receive their prize, including gold medals and a diploma at a ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden on December the 10th. Alberta Health Services says a computer hard drive containing patient information has been missing since August. It disappeared from an Edmonton hospital. The hard drive taken from a cardiac outpatient lab at the Mazankowski Alberta Heart Institute contained detailed health information of about 650 patients. The health agency says the drive was not encrypted and did not have password protection. The HS says that could be linked to an earlier theft at the lab over the August-long weekend. The drive was not discovered until a few weeks later. A trial opened today for a man who was charged in the second-degree murder of his 19-month-old son. Joey Cryer pleaded not guilty in the death of Anthony Rain, who was found dead outside of the Good Shepherd Anglican Church in Edmonton in April of 2017. It's expected that 30 witnesses will be called at the trial over the next few weeks. Crier's girlfriend at the time, Tasha Mack, is also facing a trial separately on a charge of second-degree murder. Final arguments are set for next month. A lawsuit involving CN Rail and a man who was killed in his wheelchair has been resolved. The courts heard that in July of 2016, Stephen Harrell was using his wheelchair in a safe manner when it became stuck and immobilized at a railway crossing in Moncton, New Brunswick. He was unable to free himself before he was struck and killed by a train. His parents sued CN Rail, the City of Moncton, and the wheelchair manufacturer for damages related to his death. Diane and Yvonne Harrell say while they're devastated by the tragedy, they're pleased that work is being done to prevent future tragedies at railway crossings.
We're here today to announce that the action against Canadian National Railway and the City of Moncton has been resolved. We are pleased to see that the remediation of railway crossings has taken place and continues to take place in Moncton and other communities across the country. While we are all devastated by this tragedy, we would like to thank both the federal government for its initiative and the participating rail line users and municipalities for taking advantage of the funding allowing these works to take place.
Police in Kansas City have arrested one man and are looking for another in connection with first-degree murder charges in the shooting deaths of 4 people at a bar. Police say the men opened fire after earlier being kicked out of that bar.
It is no consolation to know that this was not a random event. The tragic fact remains 4 persons were killed and 5 more wounded. Some children lost their parents. Some parents lost their children. Friends lost friends. Our city lost good neighbors.
House Democratic freshmen who now support an impeachment inquiry into U.S. President Donald Trump are explaining their decisions. As we hear in this next report, they are hearing it at fiery town halls across the United States.
Bravo Zulu on your brave, patriotic decision on the impeachment inquiry.
There's been nothing quiet about first visits home by moderate Democratic lawmakers after the decision was made to start an impeachment inquiry into President Donald Trump.
I will throw you out. I don't have no problem about throwing you out. Now, if you have a question, then we'll ask your question, but you're not going to sit here and heckle the Congresswoman.
There's anger out there. They're tired of this president being undermined, and this is just another phase of this.
Freshman Democrats were peppered in heated town hall meetings during their 2-week recess from Washington.
And I am going to take questions at the end. All I can tell you is I did not come to this lightly, and I did not want to be doing this. I felt compelled to do it.
And this instance is a clear instance of the President of the United States enlisting the help of a foreign leader to influence and malign a potential political opponent.
Luria and Slotkin, along with 5 other freshmen who flipped Republican districts in 2018, played critical roles laying the groundwork for the impeachment inquiry.
If the Democrats tell the story right, it is probably an easier one to explain, and maybe that's why some of these national security Democrats were willing to go along here, because one, they may have legitimately felt that the behavior was more egregious, but it may also be that the behavior is easier to explain.
But the decision is not without risk. Slotkin's Michigan district was carried by Trump by 7 percentage points in the 2016 election.
I think she's under control and influenced by Nancy Pelosi and not her constituents. There's nothing that the president has done that is impeachable.
Still, it's not clear that the calls for formal charges against Trump have generated widespread voter backlash.
But I salute Alyssa Slotkin for standing up and being willing to risk her career on a principle.
In Virginia, in one of the most deeply split congressional districts in the country, there are signs that Luria's call for Trump's impeachment sits uneasily among some of her constituents.
You know, people sent me to Washington to make tough choices. And, you know, I spent 20 years in the military. I didn't spend 20 years in the Navy to watch this happen, to watch the Constitution be trampled on. And I feel very strongly that I made the right decision.
Democrats are closely watching districts like these for clues to whether their drive to impeach Trump supports or threatens the party's 2020 plans.
We stand with Trump.
Tracy Brown, Associated Press.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the impeachment inquiry is just a scam. He says it is driving his poll numbers even higher and says he sort of thrives on it.
Well, first of all, the impeachment inquiry is a scam.
The conversation that I had with the Ukrainian President Zelensky was a very good it was a very cordial, very good conversation. The mistake they made, the opponents, the opposition, the Democrats, the radical left, deep state, whatever you want to call them, they came out with a whistleblower report before they saw the conversation. Had they waited one day, Nancy Pelosi wouldn't have made a fool out of herself, and she would have been able to say what I said, because when she saw it, she said, this is not what the whistleblower said.
U.S. President Trump says his decision to abandon Kurdish fighters in Syria is keeping a campaign promise to withdraw from the endless war in the region. Critics, however, say he is sacrificing a U.S. ally and undermining American credibility.
Well, we've been in Syria for a long time, and it was supposed to be a very short hit, and a hit on ISIS, but it didn't work out that way. They never left, and they've been there for many, many years. And we were down to very few soldiers in Syria. We had 50 in the region that you're talking about, 50 soldiers, and they've been already moved out.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, says when it comes to Syria, the Kurds just want to have their own state.
The only thing the Kurds ever wanted was to fight and help defend radicalism, and to have their own, state, and, something that they deserve, and something that the U.S., Israel, our allies have always supported for the Kurds. So to now turn our backs on the Kurds, we know exactly why Turkey would ever want to get involved in Syria. The only reason they'd want to get involved is to further their own agenda, and that's to diminish the Kurds.
Lisa will also discuss how the Pentagon was blindsided by Trump pulling back troops from northern Syria ahead of a Turkish assault. That's coming up after business news. We had a snowfall warning earlier today, but fortunately the white stuff won't be sticking around. I'll have a complete look at the weather picture in just a moment. The snowfall warning has ended for our region. We received a few centimeters of the white stuff. Tonight, more snow developing with a low near -6. Tomorrow, the flurry should taper off and we should see a high of -2. A high-pressure system returns on Thursday, clearing out the clouds, and we should get up to +1. The mercury increases quite a bit beginning on Friday with a high near 11. Saturday, mainly sunny and 13. Sunday, sunshine again with a high of 10 expected. Thanksgiving holiday Monday, more blue sky, sunshine, and a high of 9. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 16 degrees and an average low of 2. The highest temperature in the state was recorded in 1984 at 28 degrees, and the record low was -11 in 1985. Sunrise was at 7:41, sunset at 6:57. Let's see how tomorrow's shaping up across Canada now. There's a slight chance of showers and a high of 13 for Victoria. Expect sunshine and 10 in Vancouver. Calgary had a snowfall warning today, tomorrow clearing and a high of -1. Edmonton should be mainly sunny and a high of +1. Snow and 0 for Regina on Wednesday. A mixture of sun and cloud and 3 degrees for Saskatoon. Expect rain and 7 in Winnipeg tomorrow. Sunny and 18 for Toronto. A few clouds and 17 for both Ottawa and Montreal. It should be mainly sunny and 16 degrees in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Overcast and 17 for Halifax, Nova Scotia. Mainly cloudy and 15 for Charlottetown, PEI. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, expect a mixture of sun and cloud and a high near 11 degrees for tomorrow. Housing starts beat expectations last month, even though they were down 2.5% from August. Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation says the adjusted annual rate came in at just over 221,000 units in September. Economists had expected an annual pace of around 214,000. The housing agency says the 6-month trend in housing starts was up 2.2% last month. Markets data firm Refinitiv says single detached starts in urban centres have been trending higher since July. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer says rising protectionism in the U.S. and around the world is hurting Canadian economies.
Well, obviously there are a lot of troubling signs around the world. Anytime you see a streak of protectionism go through the world, as we saw with the United States and other countries as well, that always has a negative impact on global growth. As a conservative, I believe in free and open trade being the best way to increase prosperity and help all economies around the world prosper.
The new head of the International Monetary Fund says the global economy is in the grips of a synchronized slowdown. Kristalina Georgieva says it will result in slower growth for 90% of the world this year. She blames much of the slowdown on rising trade conflicts, such as the dispute between the U.S. and China. Georgieva says those disputes could lead to a loss of around $700 billion in output by the end of next year. That translates to about 0.8% of the world GDP. Samsung Electronics says its profit for the last quarter will fall by more than half from a year earlier. The company says it's mainly due to a sluggish demand for its core industry, computer chips. The South Korean giant estimates a drop of 56% to $6.4 billion for the third quarter. Samsung is the world's biggest maker of smartphones and semiconductors. It has struggled with falling prices for DRAM and NAND memory chips since last year. The situation was made much worse by U.S. sanctions against Huawei, a major buyer of Samsung's chips. The Danish toy maker Lego is hoping to keep its plastic bricks out of the trash. The company is testing a way for customers to ship their unwanted bricks back and get them into the hands of other kids. It said today that customers in the United States can print out a mailing label on its site, dump their used Legos in a box, and ship them off for free. Lego says the pieces will be cleaned, put in a box, and given to Teach for America. It's a nonprofit group that donates them to classrooms across the United States. Lego says if the test is successful, they may expand the program to include other countries, such as Canada. Now, here's a look at today's markets. It was a rough day for the indices today. The TSX was down 130 points. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was down 313. The NASDAQ was down 132 to 7823, and the S&P 500 was down 45 points to 2893. Oil was down 51 cents to 52.24 per barrel. Natural gas was down a penny to 2.29. Gold was up 12.28 to 15.05.82 per ounce, and silver was up 31 cents to 17.74. Wheat is at $215 per metric ton. Barley's also at $215. Canola's at $465. Corn is at $288 per metric ton. Live cattle is 8 cents lower to $108.65. Feeder cattle is up 33 cents to $142.48. Lean hogs were up $1.20 to $62.13. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly on the day to 75.06 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a Canadian-born scientist is one of the three who has won this year's Nobel Prize in Physics. James Peebles, who is originally from St. Boniface, Manitoba, will share the $1.2 million prize with Michael Mayer and Didier Queloz. They won the Nobel for the discovery of an exoplanet orbiting a solar type of star. The laureates will receive their prize, including gold medals and a diploma, at a ceremony in Stockholm, Sweden on December 10th. North Korea walked out of nuclear talks with the United States, calling the negotiations sickening. Our foreign affairs expert Lisa Daftari joins me from Los Angeles next with details. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Come out and support a worthy cause. The Blue Rain Ranch Animal Assisted Therapy Foundation Benefit Dinner and Auction is taking place on Saturday, October 19th at the Community Hall in Fort Macleod, with cocktails being served at 5:30 p.m. and dinner beginning at 6. Come dressed in your best Western wear and enjoy live music by Duo Grand Fiddle and Guitar. All proceeds to support access for low-income trauma and abuse victims to counseling and animal-assisted therapy. For tickets, call 403-894-9160, and for event details, visit bridgesofhope.com. The Galt Museum and Archives is hosting a Halloween Spooktacular on Saturday, October 26th from 1 to 4 p.m. Come for a family-friendly afternoon where you can play games, decorate a pumpkin, make a trick-or-treat bag, and other fun crafts. Plus, go on a tour of the building, hear spooky ghost stories, and enjoy free popcorn and caramel apple slices. Admission is free. For details, visit galtmuseum.com. The City of Lethbridge's residential fall leaf collection program is underway from now to November 15th. Residents can call 311 Monday to Friday between 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. to arrange for pickup. Leaves must be put in paper yard waste bags and placed in the area where garbage is normally collected. Paper yard waste bags are available for purchase at retail stores throughout Lethbridge. For more information about the residential fall leaf collection program, visit lethbridge.ca or call 311. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
U.S. President Donald Trump has pulled back troops from northern Syria ahead of a Turkish assault. Joining me now to discuss this and other big matters from around the globe is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari. Pentagon officials say they were blindsided by this move, Lisa.
It goes against a lot of what we have traditionally had in terms of our policy with Syria, in terms of what we've wanted in Syria. Look, it's never been clear-cut what the U.S.'s bottom line has been in Syria. There's so many layers to that conflict. It's an internal conflict. It's a civil war. You have ISIS. You have the Kurds. You have insurgencies. You have Iran and Russia both on the ground and supporting Bashar al-Assad. So it wasn't an easy situation to begin with. But the one thing, or I should say two things, that we were always clear about was obviously our war on ISIS, and secondly, our support of the Kurds, who were the only militiamen, we can call them, who were on the ground. They knew the terrain. We knew their loyalty was with a free world. It was with the West. The only thing the Kurds ever wanted was to fight and help defend radicalism, and to have their own, state, and, something that they deserve, and something that the U.S., Israel, our allies have always supported for the Kurds. So to now turn our backs on the Kurds, we know exactly why Turkey would ever want to get involved in Syria. The only reason they'd want to get involved is to further their own agenda, and that's to diminish the Kurds. So everyone's blindsided by this. We don't know where this is coming from. A lot of the tweets that Donald Trump has put out since this decision was announced is in defense that we've eliminated ISIS, so now there's no longer a need to be involved in a war. That's fine, but we've also created boundaries and buffers within Syria to protect those who protected us. So it's in poor taste to turn our backs on the Kurds. I've always believed that, and I think, I would love to hear more from the president, and, not just these 140 characters on Twitter with regards to this very crucial foreign policy decision.
North Korea walked out of nuclear talks, and to no one's surprise, they blamed the United States. North Korea labels the unsuccessful nuclear talks with the U.S. as sickening.
Yeah. How, Donald Trump's foreign policy is falling apart within the last 12 hours. This is not good, right? So you look at this, situation with North Korea, just like we look at his issues with China or with Iran or, with Syria, and think, if he gets this will be the crown jewel of his foreign policy. It'll help propel him for the 2020 election, et cetera. North Korea is not giving him an easy time with this. The first meeting looked like a slam dunk. It was historic. Everyone talked about it. There was that, photo op moment of the handshake between the two. Since then, he's been playing hot and cold. Both sides, I should say, have been playing hot and cold. Donald Trump speaking very highly of Kim Jong-un at times, and then other times not backing down and saying that they need to make the concessions and not the United States. So now the North Koreans, they're calling the U.S.'s bluff, or that's what they seem to be saying that they're doing, that the U.S. doesn't have a plan, and that they are being very inflexible, is the word that their envoy used to describe the situation and to defend or justify the reason why the North Koreans would pull out of the talks at this moment. But again, this is something that Donald Trump wants. He's not going to back down, and he's not going to give in. So, maybe that's a positive thing, but we'll have to see if the North Koreans buy into that, or if they back down, or what happens if they do come back to the negotiating table.
Lisa, a second Ukraine whistleblower apparently has firsthand knowledge of Trump's allegations. The whistleblower is known as an intelligence official. Why don't you share with our viewers what those allegations are?
This is a very interesting story, right? So the one thing that this turns out, the allegations, let's back up and answer your first question. The allegations are that President Trump obviously was involved in communication with the president of Ukraine. The president of Ukraine, Hal, you and I have spoken about the elections that they recently had there. This guy is a comedian, very cool young guy, new to the political world, and of course new to office. And in these conversations, Donald Trump casually mentioned Joe Biden and how his son was involved in illicit business dealings and such in Ukraine, that could make things a little bit sticky for Biden himself. And obviously, this obviously shows us that Donald Trump sees Biden as the most qualified candidate in the Democrat Party for 2020. But he wanted some dirt on Biden and his family. And since we saw reports and transcripts of these talks, and we saw that, there's not much to implicate Trump in that. There wasn't a tit for tat. There was never a time where Trump basically came right out and said, we're not going to give you aid if you don't give us dirt on Biden. But it was more of a casual, hey, what do you got? Like two buddies. But regardless, it's not seen as presidential. It's not seen as something that obviously the opposition thinks this is, grounds for impeachment. And since we've had this ruckus going on in Washington. Now there seems to be a second whistleblower who is represented by this same attorney. And what makes sense or doesn't make sense, I should say, is that this guy has the same amount of knowledge and he has the same amount of access to the call. So it's almost like, two of the same story. And if the first story wasn't compelling enough, now we have a second individual coming forward with the same story, and meaning having the same access. It doesn't give us any more information. It doesn't give us any more proximity or any more transparency to the situation. That's where we're at. But obviously, this is not a flattering situation for Americans. And especially, again, as we're coming up on this election, it's not flattering for Donald Trump. It's not flattering for the U.S. in general. The fact that the opposition wants to impeach him, and they're so fixated on impeachment rather than running their own election and winning this election, on their own grounds. That's where we're at.
Turkish President Erdogan has accepted a Trump invite to the White House. Lisa, what can we really expect to see come out of this meeting?
When it was first announced, I thought, why are we even inviting him to the White House? He's a frenemy of the United States. Turkey has been a frenemy of the United States for the last more than decade, I would say. They get their, perks, meaning the financial aid and the being in NATO, being, involved in kind of like the Western part of the Middle East, where they can, count on us and be a part of these, acronymed organizations. But at the same time, they've been double dipping. They've been siding with the Iranians. They've been siding with the Russians. They've been playing, both sides in Syria, as we now see that they're getting into, Kurdistan, I should say, into the Kurdish part of Syria. They've never been true friends. And as we know, Erdogan turned that country from a more modern country into a much more Islamist and pro-radical country in the last few years. So can we count on them? Not really. So why are we inviting them to the White House? And since the news broke late last night about us getting into Syria, Turkey getting into Syria, I think it's even more suspect as to why we would want him to come. It's not in good taste to have basically the group that was working against us in the part of the world where we were interested in paying that financial aid now being invited to the White House. So I think they'll talk about Syria, of course. They'll talk about safety zones, which they love to talk about, because this is where the different groups involved in Syria can say that they've come to some sort of consensus regarding the future of Syria, but bogus, because those insurgencies are going to pop up because there's vulnerabilities and there are way too many sharks in that sea. So we'll see what happens.
U.S. researchers are on the front line of battle against Chinese theft, Lisa. And these alleged thefts include trade secrets, pirated software, and counterfeit goods up to $600 billion annually, losses by the U.S., according to a recent report by the FBI.
Yes. So, we talk about this often. Most people look at the situation with China and look at the stock market. They look at, the fact that there's been, the tariffs have put, an excessive weight on the cost of goods coming in from China, and of course, goods coming into China from the U.S. So both sides are suffering tremendously. The importers and exporters are suffering tremendously. But at the same time, we've neglected to talk more about, in terms of the true story, the transparency here, is that the main issue that the U.S. has with China is that they don't play fairly, whether it is with the tariffs or mainly with the intellectual property or the rights to goods. So what they do is they do a lot of this copycat technology. They will steal our products, they'll steal our technology, they steal software, they are using hacking methods, they're using all sorts of very just illegal ways of stealing our technology and moving forward with it. They're ruthless. That's the bottom line, and they will do anything to get ahead, and they have. And that's why Donald Trump, who was then a candidate, even ran on this. We don't want them to continue taking advantage of the United States, and intellectual property is a main tenet of that. So I think we're really clamping down on that, and it's a wonderful place to start.
Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu said he's pushing major missile defense program to counter Iran. Tell me more about that.
Right. So when Iran disappears from the headlines and we say, well, Rouhani and Zarif came to the UN General Assembly last week, and well, here in the United States, we kind of lost sight of what the General Assembly, even what happened this year because of our whole whistleblower situation and the impeachment announcement and all that. But we kind of forget about what happened with Iran. It was a missed opportunity. The French wanted the US and the Iranians to meet. They didn't. Okay, missed opportunity. We go back to life as usual. But for Bibi Netanyahu, the missiles are still pointed towards Tel Aviv and towards Jerusalem, and he has to, really focus on that enemy. So Iran, the regime in Iran, I should say, has been fixated on Israel for years and years. For 40 years, they've been in power, and for 40 years, they funded groups like Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza and in Syria, and the list goes on. And we know all the money that the Iranian regime puts into terrorism, whether it's in Yemen or Lebanon or Iraq, and the list goes on and on and on. So, Bibi has his own plans. He can't wait for the U.S. to make up its mind regarding talks regarding whether or not there will be another nuclear deal between the West and Iran, or whether or not this will just fall by the wayside until a new president or Donald Trump gets reelected.
France is probing security agency threats after a police killer with high-level clearance was revealed as an Islamic radical.
Yes, so this happens to be the latest trend, Hal. Don't you see it? Here in the United States, we see that we have the whistleblowers are high-level intelligence officials who are pushing a different agenda. And there you go in France. The guy has high clearance. That's the way to infiltrate. You get in, you have all the secrets, you know what to do, and then you turn on them. This is nothing new, but it's mind-blowing for those around these individuals that they're playing, obviously double roles. The guy had high clearance, and this was a mystery for a long time. He was a cop killer with obviously a jihadi background. Imagine somebody with that type of ideology having access to government information, having high clearance, being able to access different areas, different types of information. And this is something that we have to watch out for. If we know that this is what they're doing, this is where we have to look.
In Hong Kong, the Chinese military is warning Hong Kong protesters amid clashes as tens of thousands defy the face mask ban.
Yes, the protests there are getting worse and worse, and the protesters are getting more and more courageous, I should say. It's actually interesting to watch. I think this is a very classical form of a grassroots movement that is just picking up more and more steam, and it's a beautiful thing in some ways to see people in Hong Kong who are generally very passive and have been told what to do and what to say and how to act and how to think for so many years, now coming to the streets, not backing down, and defying the authorities, which is, again, in that culture, that's not what's done. You don't defy the authorities. They don't have the level of crime or the opposition that we have, in the West, or free thought, even for that matter. So, this is interesting. When you have this face mask ban, you have curfews in certain areas, you have areas where the police don't want people to enter into, and they do anyway. So it's wonderful to watch. Let's see if the people get anywhere or are able to push through their agenda in any capacity. It'll be a beautiful thing.
Police in Pakistan blocked a march recently by thousands of protesters in Kashmir. Lisa, what are they protesting?
Oh, this Kashmir situation, we haven't been following it as much as we should. We heard about this a long time ago with India and Pakistan fighting over Kashmir. This is an old battle that has yet to be settled. And every few years or so, there is this flame up where they want to settle it their own way. And the people of Kashmir are those who suffer. They don't want to be under Indian rule. They don't want to be under Pakistani rule. But both sides want to claim this area and to claim it for good. Unfortunately, people don't pay attention to these parts of the world, and they protest on their own. And many times these protests just fizzle out. There's no true or significant outcome that will, really make a difference in the lives of the people who are out there protesting. So you have, unfortunately, often a high number of casualties and no real significant change to echo that.
Here's an interesting story as well, Lisa. The Catholic Church is debating whether or not married men should become priests. Let's chit-chat a bit about that.
This is a debate that's been going on for a very long time, and I know many people who are advocates or researchers, students of Catholicism who believe very strongly in this. Of course, it's against the tenet of the church to have a married man enter the church and serve God. But at the same time, when you have so many stories of these men, unfortunately, giving in to some of their urges in a way that is not normal, meaning with children or with other men, or doing things that are with underage boys, and that the headlines are all there. Unfortunately, we don't have to get into it, but should there be this reform or change within the Catholic Church, then you'd have men who openly want to be married, want to enjoy that part of life, but also want to serve God and be part of the church. And I think that who am I to have an opinion about it? But I think it's an interesting. It would be an interesting change. And perhaps that's what needs to be done in order not to have those headlines. When you have so much stringency, you're also going to have these behind-the-scenes stories, because we're all human after all.
Our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Thanks so much, Lisa.
My pleasure.
Clergy members are often tasked with caring for people in their congregations, everything from weddings to funerals to sickness and even relationship difficulties. All of that can put a lot of stress and pressure on spiritual leaders. October is Clergy Appreciation Month, and joining me now in studio is Pastor Harold Cooper from Central Church of Christ here in Lethbridge. Welcome to BCN, Harold.
Hey, thanks very much. It's a joy to be here.
So why did you decide to become a pastor? Did God speak to your heart and you're like, okay, that's it, I'm in?
No, I'm not that holy. The first thoughts that I had about being a pastor was when I was in high school, had to fill in a guidance form in terms of what your future going to be. I was taken down to the guidance office, huge row of filing cabinets. I started pulling out vocational choices, thought about maybe a minister, pulled it out, said, yeah, no thanks, whoosh, slid it in, had nothing to do with it ever since, until probably 4 years later when I made a personal decision for Jesus and went off to Bible college and just said, Lord, if you can use me, I'm available.
How often is it that we hear the pastors get stressed or even burnt out?
On that one, it's like I just have the sense anecdotally that it seems more recent and more like a larger number of guys or gals that aren't staying in it over the long haul. Like they are in it for maybe 4 or 5 years, 6 or 8 years, and they're just not sort of, I think the pressure of ministry and the circumstances, unrealized expectations about what it might be like, all those kinds of things have shaped the decision that says, I can't do this any longer. And so...
Are they taking on more than they can bear, perhaps? Because you think with a pastor, you've got the direct line to God, lean on God for strength, and if you're feeling burnt out, step away a little bit.
And maybe that's where, even philosophically for me, you have that same direct line. Right? Like, I don't have a more direct line than you do to God. I don't have more sort of spiritual power than you would as any other believer. At least that's my perspective. So the same resources that are available to you are the same that are available to me in terms of my relationship with the Lord, my personal devotional time, all those things that sort of are available. And so maybe that's one of the reasons why people either have these expectations that, oh, yeah, for sure, he's closer to God than I am, or whichever. And I think sometimes that also is a contributing factor to why they're going, it's not working out for me. I think there's this tendency to have said that pastors are something more than just people.
So, Harold, what are some of the signs that a pastor is burning out?
Okay, here's a thought about that. Burnout is like a mental health issue. And so it's really easy for anybody in any vocation to really be on the edge of burnout and hardly anybody know, right? The same way as the surprises when we hear of a pastor who takes his life. Or they have a marital issue and all of a sudden it's sort of surfaced because many of those things are mental health issues and they're easily disguised. Because I think, if nothing else, one of the things about being a pastor is we do tend to sort of put on a mask that says,
everything's
thank
good.
you, Jesus, hallelujah, it's a great day, right?
Yeah,
and so we have this expectation that, I'm hesitant about it, but it would be easy to fall into performance ministry than a real burdened and passionate ministry. So in terms of burnout signs, it'd be like anybody where I think increased irritability, increased fatigue, absenteeism, their normal things that enliven them have actually started to drain them, and you start to see that. They get distracted to other things, maybe. And so then all of a sudden it's like, Coop just doesn't seem like himself. But even at that, you almost have to be pretty close to them to actually sense, there's just something not right.
So if I'm in your congregation and I see that Pastor Harold Cooper is starting to burn out, how may I help you? What would you want from me?
There'll be a couple of things depending upon whether we've known each other very well. Like if I'm in a big congregation, you're just one of the guys that are part of it. So if we don't have a rapport, it's a little bit more difficult. But let's assume that you do.
Number one, right?
So you can be praying for me. You can be praying about the family, praying that the Lord would bring somebody into my life that would be able to sort of knock on my heart and go, hey, is everything okay? So that's just the regular parishioner. But now if it's you and I and we've known each other, it's sort of like the scriptural principle, just come and talk to me, right? And say, hey, look, can we go for coffee? Can we go for lunch? Or
how about if I make you a meal?
Yes.
Homemade meal.
Sure. Yep. That'd be ideal. So those kinds of things. But the other one, I think as well, what can happen is you share it with a buddy. Have you noticed that Coop's not doing so well?
Oh, right? Gossip?
Aha, right. And so then it sounds very spiritual, but I need you to pray. More ideally, go to the leadership in your church and pose the question, how is Coop doing? Have you noticed anything? Like, I've noticed some things. I was just wondering about them. Is that something that the leadership has been working with him or her to sort of work through? Because I just noticed he hasn't quite seemed to be himself, right? And so they might know something. I mean, it could be emotional, but it could be something physical as well, where he's got a health issue. And so I think the leadership in the church plays a huge role in the wellness of the guy or gal that's serving.
Do pastors sometimes take on too much? They'll help with relationship issues. They're getting ready for that Sunday sermon, of course, all the time.
Yeah.
They're doing visitations, maybe newcomers. I mean, there's a lot.
Oh, I would say the short answer is yes.
Okay.
Right? So even in a multiple
staff. Do they have to start designating maybe to more of the pastoral staff?
Well, if there's another one around, right? But in most of the churches, when I think about the evangelical ministerial, we meet once a week for prayer, to pray for the churches and our leaders. So when I think about the guys that are sitting around that room, one guy, one guy, one guy, one guy. Oh, he's got two. Oh, he's trying to find some other guys. So I would suggest that most of our churches in Lethbridge and probably across Canada are a one-person operation.
Wow.
And so as a result of that, you have a lot of overworked or over-engaged or over-decided people that are trying to do care compassionately and personally, and as a result, they don't get much of a break. And so there's some other things around that in terms of how do we help.
How about if you pass off some of that responsibility to some of your congregants, the lay pastors? Like to me, say, Hal, can you help out with hospital visitations, maybe some counseling?
Right. Yep.
If I'm an expertise in that area, right?
Right. And so that for sure. So one of the things that we've done in our little congregation is we created a compassionate care team, and they do all the shut-in visitations. Because I'm really good at some stuff, but I'm not so great at getting around and just having a tea and a visit with everybody. So again, sort of knowing what the pastor's strengths are and then making up for some of those, that's good leadership from the local leadership in the congregation, and them going, who else can do this? Right. Like we had a thing that said, oh, I can do that, I can do that. But finding those that can say, I can do that, presupposes as well that yes, you've actually got some talents, or I could do training and sort of go, hey, if you'd like to help with this, here's how we do that. Come with me and I can show you. So in the short term, it might take longer, but in the long term, it's healthier.
Pastors are not immune to marriage problems, financial problems, human just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
How do they navigate through those?
I actually think it's harder for them or anybody that's in public eye, because everything about them seems to be magnified, right? It's sort of like in that fishbowl. The thing about the fishbowl is it amplifies
You're under the
everything
microscope.
behind the glass. Yeah. So then it's, I think, a lot harder because they don't get to just take it home. because everything about their life is then public. So when they might suggest, hey, I need to take about a month, 6 weeks to just work on some relational stuff, it's not always necessarily available because, well, then who's going to do your job? And so I think there are some factors there, particularly with marital and with financial, that, well, just anybody, nobody wants to talk about their money. In Canada, we'll talk about all kinds of things except, so how you doing on your income this year? And how's your debt load? And so we don't do that, but we should be somehow. Somebody needs to be speaking into them. And I think lots of guys in ministry don't get the training in terms of how to manage even church business as well as personal business.
If you know your pastor is suffering through some marital issues, that must be a very sensitive subject. How do you approach the pastor and say, how may I help you in that regard?
Yep. I think, like we've already said earlier, like to let them know that, hey, we're praying for you.
Yeah.
An encouragement card, especially because, like you've already said, all kinds of other people in that group of people will have also had to struggle through marital pressures and conflicts and issues.
How about a gift card to go out to a restaurant for he and his wife?
Yes, I think that's an ideal option. To give them an opportunity. Here's some other resources that I've been aware of. It's always a bit tricky to sort of go, hey, I just read this great book on how to love your wife or how to love your husband, right? And you sort of go, here you go. And it really, ministry is so much about relationship with people, right? And I think that's where the closer that you can develop a relationship with your pastor, friendship-wise, socially, whichever, that has the potential to then make it more comfortable for what you offer to be received.
What about financial pressures that a lot of pastors face today? Are a lot of them underpaid?
Anecdotally, I would think probably yes. Mm-hmm. Again, because of the ability of the congregation, and that's particularly in the independent structures, right? In larger denominational structures, and I don't know how salary grids are set up or things like that. And so I think lots of the salary or package or offering is often more measured by the ability of the congregation to provide it, because that's where it's coming from. Mostly, I think, in particular, the evangelical churches. And so the pastor makes a decision about, can we live on that?
You know, I wanted to ask you, is it almost like real estate that 10% are taking home 90% of the business? Is it 10% of the regular congregants providing 90% of what the church takes in, the regulars?
So the 1090 principle sort of carries over into almost everything, whether it's a volunteer organization or the church or nonprofit or even sometimes in business. And so for sure, that's also the case. Like if we were to look at our, even just general giving as a whole in most churches, there'll usually be a small percentage. It might be a little bit more than 10, it might be 15 or 20.
Sure.
And then the rest are just doing what they can. But the bulk of it, which would be again based on, which is why a percentage giving strategy is best, because then you give out of your bounty and I would give out of mine. It would just be different, but we have equal giving in terms of sacrifice.
How much on a day-to-day basis do family members also feel that stress that the pastor may potentially bring home, like the pastor's spouse and their children?
I would think in some ways they feel it more so, because when he comes home with work, right, and he's going, I just wanted to punch somebody in the throat today.
Oh.
Right?
That's when you pray for that pastor right away.
Exactly, yep. So you definitely want to be on top of that one. But
before he lays hands on his brother.
Right, yeah, in a Jesus kind of way.
Right,
of course. So in that process, the family, I think, is just under more pressure because realistically or unrealistically, there's an expectation that not only will the pastor and his wife be perfect, but so will their children. And so then you've got all these kids who are living under really an unfair pressure, but it's there. No different than a politician or anybody in public life of any type. There's an added watchful, critical, I would like to see them be more supportive and more compassionate and more understanding, but oftentimes I don't think that's the general response.
How often does a pastor have a sounding board, a good friend they can explain their problems to and unburden their lives to?
I would say that in the last, because I've been at this a long time, I would say in the last 15 or more years, that's gotten better. When I first went into ministry, I had two pieces of advice because I was a young man. One, wear a dark suit. You'll look older.
Oh.
So I went to this small rural congregation in Southern Ontario, and so I got a dark suit and got the job. The other one was, don't get close to the men, or don't get too close to your men. That wasn't good advice. Because
why did they give you that advice?
Because what often happens is, not often, I want to be careful. The risk factor is, these are the people that are then going to be making decisions about your future. And so when you're sharing issues of, you know, Mary and I, we're just having a hard time right now. So then he now is in this conflict place. So does he share that with the committee? Does he share that with the board? Because now he has a fiduciary responsibility. Or does he just say, well, look, that's just private for us? And so I think there was a time when some of the leadership potential weren't sure what to do with some of that information. And so I think that was why. The nice thing is, I think that that's changed more in the last 15 or 20 years, especially as ministries like Promise Keepers and others are going, the silent wolf often is in deep trouble.
Pastor Hill Cooper from Lethbridge Central Church of Christ, thanks for joining me in studio today talking about Clergy Appreciation Month.
Hope it was helpful. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us here at BCN, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless. Thanks for watching.